Tonight on Steelers Talk, are the Pittsburgh Steelers actually considering hiring Mike McCarthy as their next head coach? It certainly would be different from their previous 3 head coaching hires in the Super Bowl era. We'll discuss that possibility at the top of today's show. Then Brian Flores was back in the Burgh today for his in-person interview with the Pittsburgh Steelers. I'll let you guys know the latest when it comes to Coach Flo. Then we'll get into some bad news for the Pittsburgh Steelers from Fox Sports reporter Jay Glazer at the end of today's show. If you want to see what that bad news is, make sure you guys stick around. But before we get into the content today, the search continues for the next head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers right here on Steelers Talks. Make sure you guys subscribe to the channel. It just takes one click of a button right below this video for daily updates on the Pittsburgh Steelers head coaching search like we're giving you guys today. We also have other daily content that's coming up here with the NFL offseason, cut candidates, trade candidates, a perfect Steelers offseason, all that stuff is going to be coming up here in the next few weeks. Make sure you guys click that subscribe button to never miss any of our premium content. All right, so now let's start with Big Mike. Mike McCarthy is getting an in-person interview with the Pittsburgh Steelers tomorrow. And Tom Pelissero said today that Mike McCarthy is, quote-unquote, focused on the Pittsburgh Steelers head coaching job, and he is considered a, quote-unquote, strong candidate to get the job here in Pittsburgh. According to Pelissero, he actually took himself out of the running for the Tennessee Titans head coaching position to focus on getting the Steelers head coaching position. This was the report from Pelissero earlier today, saying Super Bowl winning head coach Mike McCarthy will interview Wednesday with the Steelers per sources. McCarthy was a candidate for the Titans before withdrawing Monday morning and has turned down other inquiries. He's focused on Pittsburgh, where he's considered a strong candidate. So listen, man, this immediately, with my mind, goes right to Aaron Rodgers. And if the Pittsburgh Steelers want Aaron Rodgers back in 2026, Mike McCarthy probably gives them the best chance to go to Aaron and say, hey, do you want to come back for one more season here? Run it back with your boys here in Pittsburgh for one more year with your former head coach that you're still very close with. I think that's a pretty decent strategy. If you want Aaron Rodgers to return, I'll tell you whether or not I want Rodgers to return to Pittsburgh next year here in just a second. But then there's also a report here from Jets reporter Connor Hughes, who says, I remember talking to Aaron Rodgers in the locker room towards the end of his tenure with the Jets, mentioned, quote unquote, wherever Mike McCarthy ends up as a potential landing spot. Sure sounds like McCarthy is headed to the Steelers. Wonder if that gets Rodgers back for another year. Now, I think, Connor Hughes probably doesn't have any inside information on the Steelers. He covers the New York Jets. So I don't think, McCarthy is, actually the favorite right now or anything like that. But it does sound like the Pittsburgh Steelers would like to do business with Aaron Rodgers again in 2026. And if that is their strategy, I would say bringing in Mike McCarthy, Rodgers' likely preferred option as the next head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers, would help accomplish that goal. ESPN's Brooke Pryor said this about the team wanting to bring back Aaron Rodgers next season. The Steelers players are more than open to Rodgers returning to Pittsburgh. They want the 4-time league MVP back and conveyed as much to various members of the Steelers organization during their exit meetings last week, according to sources. Almost all Steelers players praised Rodgers during their exit interviews, and most, if not all of them, want the veteran quarterback to return in 2026. His support among players was universal, and those around the organization pointed out how beloved and respected Rodgers was there. Rodgers, 42, did not commit to retiring or returning to the Steelers during his conversations with the organization, according to sources, and wants to take time away before deciding his future. Whoever the defending AFC North champion Steelers pick for their next head coach likely would factor into Rodgers' decision. The Steelers have been open to a Rodgers return throughout the season, and even though their season ended with Monday's loss to the Houston Texans, they still are. The fact that so many within the organization want him to return has propelled the case to bring him back. So it certainly seems like the players in the locker room, a lot of the personnel in the front office, a lot of them seem to really want Aaron Rodgers back in 2026. And if their goal is to put together the best possible pitch to get Aaron Rodgers to return next year, bringing back his former head coach that he said that he would like to play for again would probably give them their best shot of doing so. And you can also look at this from the angle, guys, that because next year's quarterback market is so rough and there's not a lot of, great options out there for the Steelers to consider, bringing back Rodgers for another season after he just led this team to their first division championship in a half decade and the players loving him and the offense under him as much as they did, I get the thinking. I do. Now, personally, I would go in a younger and more modern direction than Mike McCarthy, because if McCarthy comes back and if Rodgers is the quarterback here, the offense is going to be practically identical to what it was last season. Rodgers is essentially going to be running the show on offense, and honestly, I don't trust Mike McCarthy to hire a good defensive coordinator either. I would rather go with Chris Shula. I'd rather go with Brian Flores. I'd rather go with Jesse Minter. I'd rather even go with a guy like Anthony Weaver before I would go with a guy like Mike McCarthy. And for me, guys, this would feel like, hiring the offensive version of Mike Tomlin. I mean, Mike McCarthy has been a guy that's been known as, a long-tenured head coach, somebody that has a lot of success in the regular season, somebody that hasn't, done all that much in the playoffs over the last several years. And, he's another guy that a lot of people think, where the game has kind of passed him by, and he's kind of an older school head coach, not to mention he's 62 years old, older than Mike Tomlin was. As much as I don't love the idea of Mike McCarthy, guys, it does feel like a realistic possibility for a number of reasons. And it's not like Mike McCarthy as a head coaching candidate is like a terrible candidate in every single facet. There are positives to his profile, starting with the fact that he's a Pittsburgh native and he grew up cheering for the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Steelers head coaching job is probably his dream job, which is why he's pushing so hard to be the next head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers. He can connect to the fans and the culture here in Pittsburgh because obviously, he grew up here and he knows, what this job means to the city and to this fan base. So there would be that. But then also he does run a little bit of a modern pro spread offense. It was when he first got to Dallas, kind of ran the same stuff he ran in Green Bay, kind of the older school, shotgun, West Coast style of offense, but then he kind of transitioned to a more pure progression style offense. It was still lots of shotgun, still lots of spread, but it was a little bit more modern, and as a result, Dak Prescott had a really great season in 2023. He was an MVP candidate that year, and CeeDee Lamb had an absolutely monster season as the number one receiver there in that Dallas offense. So, the offense, I think, would be fine, in terms of the schematics if he gets hired here. Also, just in terms of his track record, he's got 11 win seasons over 18 years. Like, he's got over 60% win percentage in his career. Like, kind of like Mike Tomlin, McCarthy is another guy that's had a lot of, regular season success. He knows how to run an NFL organization. He's got a ton of experience in that, and he's very stable as the leader of an organization, which is important to a guy like Art Rooney, who, said about the Tomlin regime that his favorite thing about it was that they were in contention every year. McCarthy's teams usually are in contention. Then also, he had 11 career playoff wins. If he gets hired as the next head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers, that would be the third most among current NFL head coaches. So he's got a lot of playoff experience. He's coached in 22 playoff games. Now, we'll talk about, his recent playoff record, which is not as good here in a second, but he's also a Super Bowl champion. Now, it's been a long time, kind of like Mike Tomlin, since he's won a Super Bowl. And that one Super Bowl championship has certainly, given Mike a lot of opportunities that he might not have gotten otherwise. But he is a Super Bowl champion, so you do have to mention that. But, there's a lot of cons to hiring Mike McCarthy as well that I think we have to talk about, guys. The first one is that, it's really a lackluster recent playoff record. Why was he fired from Dallas? I mean, obviously the 2024 season didn't go the Cowboys' way, but before that, the main criticism of Mike McCarthy is that he would get blown out in the playoffs and that he would lose in the first round of the playoffs every single year. What did we just, get done with Mike Tomlin with? Not winning in the playoffs in the first round. I mean, like I said, it feels like you're replacing Mike Tomlin with Mike Tomlin here, only on the offensive side of the ball if you hire Mike McCarthy. Then also, he's a very poor game manager. This has been one of the biggest bugaboos with him his entire career, especially because he likes to call plays. And these guys that like to call their own offensive plays, they don't don't usually, handle challenges well, or timeouts, or end of game situations. It's been a big issue with a guy like Mike McCarthy throughout his coaching career. Also, his teams are usually very highly penalized. I mean, it seemed like every single year he was in Dallas, the team was the most penalized team in the league. And, obviously penalties hurt a team a lot. And, I don't want an undisciplined culture here in Pittsburgh like it was in Dallas when McCarthy was coaching there. Then also, I would have questions about who does he hire as his defensive coordinator. I mean, the best defensive coordinator hire he ever had, arguably, was Dan Quinn. He's currently the head coach of the Washington Commanders. He's unavailable. So who are you bringing in? Joe Witt Jr., who was just fired by Quinn in Washington, as his defensive coordinator? Do you bring in Al Harris, who was a part of that Cowboys staff? He's currently the Bears pass game coordinator. That might be the best, case scenario here for the Steelers defensive coordinator. And God forbid he hires Mike Zimmer again. No way I want Mike Zimmer as the next defensive coordinator of the Pittsburgh Steelers. And then, we also have to just acknowledge the reality here that, I don't think Mike McCarthy is a long-term solution. I mean, the Steelers, what they tend to do is they hire younger coaches so that they can, have them for a decade plus and all those different things. And, Mike McCarthy's 62 years old. Like, how much longer is he really going to be coaching? I think that's a legitimate question mark to have. And in the end, my take on Mike McCarthy, guys, is that if this ends up being the hire for Pittsburgh, I'm going to be pretty disappointed in the decision, okay? And, I would understand it. I understand it if, you really want to run it back with your veterans and continue to try and win Super Bowls with this current group of Steelers. If you want to bring Aaron Rodgers back for another season, I would understand the decision. But I think at this point, with Mike Tomlin leaving the organization, it's an opportunity to modernize. It's an opportunity to get somebody younger in here with a fresh perspective, somebody that isn't living in the 2000s when it comes to coaching. And his connections to the coaching space. I would much rather go with a Brian Flores or a Chris Shula or, even a Nate Schilhaas or Clay Kubiak. I'd rather have those guys, as completely unproven play callers on the offensive side of the ball compared to a guy like Mike McCarthy. So, I'll get behind Big Mike if he ends up being the next head coach of the Steelers, but I think there's better options out there, and I think the Steelers should give some pause to this idea of hiring Mike McCarthy as this team's next head coach. So what say you guys? Let me know down there in the comments section. Grade a potential Mike McCarthy hire as the next head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Give me an A, B, C, D, or F down there in the comments section. For me personally, I would probably give it a C- or a D. I really wouldn't be that high on this hire at all, guys. But this will be the pinned comment on today's show. In just a second here, I'm going to tell you about our sponsor today at Prize Picks. And while I tell you about our sponsor, simply give me an A, B, C, D, or F down there in the comments. And with that, let's have a word from our sponsor today at Prize Picks. And the big game is almost here in Santa Clara, guys, and there's no better way to cash in during America's biggest sporting event than with Prize Picks, where it always feels good to be right. And since the big game is right around the corner, that also means it's your last chance to get into the football action before next season. So close the season out right with Prize Picks by getting $50 instantly in lineups when you play your first $5. With the new social feeds feature, you can share Prize Picks with your friends and copy lineups from winners with a single click. Copy lineups you like or use them as inspiration for your own picks. And a new feature Prize Picks now has is early payouts. If your player gets off to a hot start, you can have the option to cash out those winnings before the game even finishes. So you guys can take a look here at my projection for conference championship weekend here. I'm taking the more on passing yards for Drake May. Sorry, Jared Stidham, I'm taking the less on your passing yards, but then I'm also taking the more on the passing yards of Matthew Stafford and Sam Darnold, and I think we're going to get a shootout in Seattle on Sunday. So download the Prize Picks app today if you haven't already, and use code CLNS to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code CLNS to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5. Prize Picks, it's good to be right. So today, Coach Flores, former linebackers coach for the Pittsburgh Steelers and current Vikings defensive coordinator, held his in-person interview for the Pittsburgh Steelers head coaching position today. And obviously, this is a candidate here that has been in the building. Players know him. He's got that instant credibility inside the locker room. And, there's some whispers out there that Mike Tomlin, told Art Rooney and Omar Khan that this is the guy that they should go out and hire. hire. But Mark Maskey here from the Washington Post reported this last night. Brian Flores is believed to be a serious contender for the Steelers' head coaching job. He previously worked for the Steelers as their linebackers coach under Mike Tomlin before his successful defensive coordinator stint with the Minnesota Vikings. Now, guys, here's what I'll say about Brian Flores, because we've been talking about him a lot on this channel. We even have a full video dedicated to his defensive scheme if you want to check it out. But the thing that I know, man, and I know a lot of Vikings fans, in fact, Patrick Seatman, our Vikings host, has been talking to me a lot about this. Vikings fans are praying that we don't take him away from their football team because they understand what Flores brings as a defensive mind. They've watched his defense over the last 3 seasons, and they're saying stuff like there's no defensive coordinator we could possibly hire that's as good as Brian Flores. That's how much Minnesota Vikings fans love B-Flow. And believe it or not, guys, there was actually a push this season from Vikings fans to fire Kevin O'Connell, last year's coach of the year, so that they don't lose Flores this offseason. All right, they wanted to hire Flores as their head coach over last year's coach of the year. That shows you just how much respect those Minnesota Vikings fans have for Brian Flores, and they are praying. They are sitting by their bedside every single night, praying to the football gods that the Pittsburgh Steelers don't take this guy away from them. That's how they feel about Coach Flo, and that should tell you exactly how they feel about that defensive structure and what he does for that defense. Because honestly, I know it's a little bit of an expensive defense, but what superstar level players exist in that Vikings defense? There's not that many, and in fact, he's maybe turned some players in that Vikings defense, especially Andrew Van Ginkel, Jonathan Grenard. These guys are considered to be top-notch players when they really weren't before they went into Coach Flores' system. So we've talked about his system ad nauseum on this channel, guys. Flores, I think, is better than any other defensive mind in football, and the Steelers have a chance to make him their next head coach, which is why he's my preferred candidate. And then meanwhile, you look at a guy like Chris Shula, who, by the way, I would love as a hire for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think he's a very qualified candidate, all these different things. When you talk to Rams fans, when you look at Rams Twitter, they could kind of care less if Chris Shula leaves as the defensive coordinator of the Los Angeles Rams. And in fact, a lot of Rams fans blame Shula for a lot of the issues that the defense for the Rams has been having, specifically in the secondary over the second half of the season. All right, so that doesn't mean that the Steelers have to hire Flores or anything like that, or that he's a better candidate than Shula necessarily. But it's just I think it's interesting that Vikings fans are terrified that we're going to take away their defensive coordinator away from them, whereas Rams fans are like, nah, you can have him. I just think that's a little bit interesting right there. But I think another big question that surrounds Brian Flores as a candidate is who would he bring in as his offensive coordinator? And I keep hearing people and seeing people on Steelers Twitter saying he has no good connections to offensive coordinator candidates, and for some reason they all think he's going to bring in somebody from his days with Bill Belichick and the Patriots. But no, man, he's more likely going to be bringing in somebody from a modern NFL offense, unless it's Brian Dable. Dable is available, but I would assume he brings someone over from Minnesota, or, maybe, he agrees to bring in Shieldhaas or bring in Clay Kubiak or somebody like that. And another guy that apparently is connected to Flores, according to Zachary Smith, is current wide receivers coach for the Chicago Bears under Ben Johnson, Antoine Randall Ellis, Steelers legend, man. Now, this guy is apparently the right-hand man to Ben Johnson in Chicago, and he has been for a little bit there. So if you could bring in a Ben Johnson-style offense here to Pittsburgh under Brian Flores, I think that would be a very good thing to do if the Pittsburgh Steelers end up hiring Flores to be their next head coach. But some other offensive coordinator candidates that he could bring in, Brian Dable is considered one of the top offensive coordinator candidates in the league right now. He's got a connection to Dable from their time in New England, but then also Grant Udinski, who doesn't call plays right now in Jacksonville. He would call plays here in Pittsburgh, so he might make that quote-unquote lateral move to be the OC here in Pittsburgh. Of course, he worked in Minnesota last year with Flores. Wes Phillips is currently the offensive coordinator there in Minnesota. He would probably like to call plays as well. Same thing goes for Josh McCown, who has been kind of picking and choosing his opportunity to be an offensive offensive coordinator. He's currently the QB coach there in Minnesota. He might be actually waiting for Flores to get his next head coaching opportunity so that he can make that jump to offensive play caller. And now, just so you guys know, the interview schedule for this week, and by the way, these are not necessarily the only interviews that they're going to have. Chris Shula and Nate Schillhouse could still certainly be in the mix to get second interviews, but right now, Brian Flores got his in-person interview today. Mike McCarthy is getting his in-person interview tomorrow, and then Anthony Weaver is getting his in-person interview on Friday in Pittsburgh. Okay, so just so you guys know, that's the schedule for this week. I'm sure, if they're really that in on Chris Shula, we could see them schedule a meeting with him next week. Now, we can talk a little bit here in our final topic on today's show, where Jay Glazer, who, by the way, is very, very close with Mike Tomlin. Sorry for the typo there on the graphic, but Jay Glazer, not Galzer, Jay Glazer from Fox Sports reports that Mike Tomlin is quote-unquote done with coaching moving forward and may not ever coach again in the National Football League, which would surprise me because Tomlin is not really that old at this point. And he's a coaching junkie, man. I think at some point he's got to return to the coaching ranks. Now, the reason why it's bad news, and the reason why, it would be bad for Steelers fans if Tomlin never returns to coaching, is because you can't get that trade compensation for him in a potential trade if Tomlin decides to come back and coach in the future. I mean, you take a look at what the Broncos dealt to the New Orleans Saints in order to have Sean Payton be their next head coach. They gave up a first-round pick and a second-round pick for Sean Payton to be their next HC. Okay, and if this is the going rate, I mean, I would love to add another first-round pick. I would love to add another second-round pick, especially because Tomlin, we know for a fact, is not going to be returning. So it'd be better to get something for him than not. And if he stays retired, unfortunately, we never get to see those picks. And if he stays gone, we're not going to have the benefit of getting those additional picks that you could potentially get if he returns to the coaching ranks. Now, my take on the situation, guys, is that I don't think a guy like Mike Tomlin can stay away. I think that there will be an opportunity that presents itself in the near future with an established, probably star-level quarterback on a team that, has been good but has been underperforming with their current head coach. And Tomlin says, you know what, this is too good of an opportunity for me to say no. I'm going to go coach here. They can send a couple picks to Pittsburgh, and I can be their new head coach. So I still think Tomlin, as somebody that is, a football addict, he loves coaching. I just don't think he's going to be able to, adjust to life away from the National Football League very well. And I think after a year off, he's going to feel fresh enough to return to the league, and the Steelers will get those draft picks just like the Saints got for Sean Payton. So predict it for me down there in the comment section. Will Mike Tomlin eventually return to the NFL as a head coach? Give me a yes or a no down there in the comment section to let me know what you guys think. Personally, I don't think Tomlin's going to be able to stay away, but let me know what you guys think. And then we'll finish up today's show with some sad news here. Danny Smith, the much beloved and now former special teams coordinator here in Pittsburgh, got hired by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and Todd Bowles today. So obviously we wish Danny the best of luck there in Tampa. And man, I'm going to be missing, Danny's energy and his vibe and the gum chewing that we have become accustomed to here in Pittsburgh. The Steelers special teams has been something that this team has been known for many years, and Danny Smith is a big reason why that is. So I just wanted to give a little bit of love to Danny here, and best of luck to you there in Tampa Bay, Mr. Danny Smith. But that'll be it for today's show, guys. I really do appreciate your guys' support in making it to the end of today's show. Tomorrow we're going to have more coaching updates. Mike McCarthy visits the Pittsburgh Steelers tomorrow. We will get you guys the latest updates as they come, as the Steelers continue their search for their next head coach.